All right, welcome to the Work Sucks, But I Like It podcast. Today we have Cynthia Morrow. She's a true elder millennial. Graduating in 2009 in the recession, she has navigated work through catering jobs, not getting a job at Chipotle, to earning her PhD in health services. She is now an assistant professor at Michigan State University, and on her best days, as she says, she writes about science, work, and the science of work. Cynthia, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much.
Cynthia, define work for us today.
From our perspective, in the research that I do, work is often the construct of getting things done. So that can be for your, the fruition of your own labors. Like, let's say you're an entrepreneur, you're a founder, you have your own agenda, even if that agenda is existing within a W-2. So you're still working toward that agenda. Or it can be in order to get paid within a formal construct.
So how do you see that applied to you?
How I see that applied to me is certainly been an uneasy relationship, which I think is true for most of us. My sister was a ballerina and she started dancing at 3, and that's all she ever wanted to do. And in my little small town, when I would meet friends of my parents, they would say, "Well, are you the dancer?" And I would say, "No." And then they would say, "Well, what are you?" And I'm like, "I'm not sure." So I've had a varied path, and a common thread for me for work is working with other people who care a lot about what they're doing. I would say that's a common thread of what work is for me, for my own agenda to get things done. And working with a lot of curious people, I would say, is another common thread.
I love that. So when I introduce you, you have true elder millennial. I actually don't know what that means. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so there are probably multiple definitions depending on your perspective, but my definition is, born in 87, graduated from college with an idea of what the post-grad work landscape would look like, and was confronted with a very different reality. I will never forget putting in an application, a paper application in a stack this big at a Chipotle, and the woman working there just smiled understandingly at me, but we both knew the fate of that paper application. So I ended up working for a catering company where I could work at like 5 a.m. with danishes and coffee for like early morning meetings, but then volunteer doing the work that I actually wanted to do, which was research. So I think that wandering path is something that a lot of elder millennials found themselves on. And I think it's resulted in some good things, adaptability, creativity, but it's resulted in some baggage too. I read the book Burnout not too long ago, and I think it spoke to a lot of us who experienced that.
Well, I just laugh, Cynthia, because I'm the same. So I was born in 87, graduated 2009. We know the economy was shit then. And I guess it's funny because I went into grad school and dropped out. So my path has definitely been windy as well. I guess but in those moments though, it's almost like you had to experience that to do the work you do today, right? So I guess what you sort of followed this little thread. How did you build from that experience to the work you're now doing? I guess what prompted you to go back to school?
What prompted me to go back to school was an interest in ethics and health services research. And it was also, I think, being totally honest, the structure that I so badly was missing joining the economy that we joined as undergraduate who just graduated. So it was the expectations were clear. Let me follow those expectations. My role and my responsibilities are clear. I can fulfill that role of student and learner. I started working for the medical school while I was getting my PhD in health services research at University of Colorado. And my fabulous boss ran her department in the same way. Roles and responsibilities were clear, expectations were clear. So I found a path in which I could be successful. And I think a lot of people who gravitate towards school, they want to know the path that they must take in order to be deemed successful, whatever that means. And so I think that was a lot of the natural pull. And then I also just like to read, like to write. So school worked well.
So I'm very curious, like, I mean, a PhD is quite the endeavor, right? So why health services research? Like, what kind of piqued your interest to say, hey, I want to really study this and get a PhD in it?
So I graduated with my master's in bioethics first. And so I had this construction in my head that ethics is what we should do, but we're limited by resources and by capabilities and by the realities of the world. So health services research is what we can do. And I liked the empiric nature of health services research. And so today, I still teach and write and research within those realms. And even though I'm a realist working with big data, and studying organizational forces with my organizational psychologist collaborator, I never lost that ethics lens that I gained. So what should we be doing versus what can we do, and how do we optimize between those two forces?
So I love that you bring up ethics, right? And I guess like one thing we like to say, Cynthia, on the show is that success is not a matter of good luck, it's good skills. Now, I believe having a sort of moral compass, if you will, is a good thing to have. What would you say is the skill to develop this sort of like ethical practice, I guess, in our lives?
I think one of the skills is being able to learn from frameworks of thinking. So, that the idea that an ethics question is a matter of perspective, is a matter of heart, is a matter of opinion, I think limits the utility of those conversations. But functioning within a field accepted framework allows for more fruitful discussions, better decisions, just, realizing the frameworks and the structure, again, maybe seeking that structure again to help us have those ethical conversations and answer hard ethics frameworks, I think is valuable. And when I've been in ethics discussions, utilizing a framework has allowed individuals to pinpoint at what point they do disagree about the answer to an ethical question. So rather than say we completely disagree with each other, you follow a framework. You say we agree on that the problem's important. We agree that there needs to be a solution. It's at point, the plan at step 1, point A, point 2, point, whatever, that's the point at which we are disagreeing. And so you see black and white how much you agree with the person that you're discussing this ethical question with. So that's what I would want to share, is that there are tools available for individuals and for organizations to tackle really hard ethical questions.
So what's an example of a framework that you might give someone that's, say a 9 to 5 job and their workplace culture sucks, they hate their boss, they want to do all these things. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? What kind of framework would you present to them?
I would say, your boss sucks, your team sucks, everything is terrible. Taking a look at incentive systems is a framework in
Ah.
which we can evaluate ourselves and each other. Are there perverse incentive systems that are naturally making individuals conflict? I want to maximize the profits on this project. Someone else is responsible for the client relationship. The client relationship will be hurt if I am overstating the work done on this project to maximize profits. But our profits will be hurt if my collaborator is constantly promising the client things that we can't deliver under the current scope. So I think incentive systems is a natural structure to help us navigate the workplace. Another one is, established work and psychological safety. So psychological safety in the workplace has a keen and a real and operationalized definition. So, how can we identify, using that operationalized definition, to identify violations of psychological safety? So, my team sucks. Everything I say, people shut down. I can't get anywhere. Looking at the definition of psychological safety, is it that the environment has not allowed for risk taking, has not allowed for doubt? So that if you're saying something that perhaps your team disagrees with, they're responding with silence because it's not a psychologically safe environment to express doubt with what you're saying. So I think those are two phenomenon that can help us get along and work within a framework together in the workplace.
I love that. So let's look at incentive systems first off, because I love both of these. I want to kind of ask some questions around that. So incentive systems, I guess, like When I think of incentive, I think of pay, right? Maybe that's what the listeners are thinking of as well. Is it just restricted to pay? What other ways can we incentivize the team?
Pay is a big component, absolutely. Another incentive system is how you will be evaluated as a member of the team. So evaluation, let's say you have like a yearly performance review. And part of what I am evaluated on as an analyst, let's say, is my utilization rate. So I want most of my working hours to be billable to a particular project. But then other researchers on my team who are responsible for the P&L of that project, they're evaluated on the margins of their project. And so I'm trying to maximize my hours on a project in order to improve my utilization rate. They're trying to decrease analyst hours in order to improve the margins on the project. We have conflicting incentive systems in that scenario. And so interpersonal conflict may not be personal at all, simply economic.
Interesting. How does intrinsic motivation factor into this? How would you say you'd intertwine this?
That's a really good question. I think intrinsic motivation, it plays a huge role, doesn't it, in where we find ourselves and how we feel once we get there. So
Yeah.
I think that the murkiness of how to make decisions at work is oftentimes an immediate murkiness. Like I can't decide, what to prioritize at work is really an upstream issue of I don't know what my goal is in being here. I had the opportunity to speak with some graduating seniors at the university that I attended, Lawrence University in Wisconsin. And one of the things they asked me was, what should I be looking for in my very next job? And I'm like, not trying to apply to Chipotle. But other than that advice, the advice that I had was look at the skills that you'll gain there. I think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors with titles. You certainly have to consider pay, but drilling down to what skills you'll be able to, hone in on as a recent graduate at your next job after graduation, I think will provide some guidance into how you want to spend your work time. And it will also improve your resume.
Love that. No, I like that kind of practical advice, looking at the skills that you're going to develop and not necessarily the title you're going to obtain. No,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
excellent. So I want to talk about the second system now. So psychological safety. I mean, Cynthia, you've heard it before, right? People will say, well, I'm here for the job. I don't want to make friends, right? This isn't my family. I'm here to do work. How do you respond to that? And I guess how do you build a psychologically safe space around people like that with that mentality?
There are definitely methods to evaluate whether a workplace is psychologically safe. And I think that's kind of the first step. And on what matrices is it or is it not safe? It shows up as symptoms of a problem, right? So we're not asking in the work that I've been doing, the organizational psychologist I've been working with, Dr. Jennifer Wisdom, she, with her client engagements that are trying to improve their organizations, she doesn't ask them, is your organization psychologically safe? Instead, she asks assessment questions that identify the symptoms of a psychologically unsafe work environment. So, do people express doubt? Do people shoot from the hip and brainstorm new ideas? Do people take risks in their conversation? So, a risk in a conversation would be challenging someone who is more senior than you in the hierarchy, or making a joke within meetings is also another form of risk. So, I think assessing whether the workplace is psychologically safe means assessing these kind of symptoms. And in order to manage it, or if you can't prevent it, right? You've been hired into the space. This is the way it is. One of the ways to do it is conversationally with your team. So encouraging brainstorming, encouraging risk-taking and conversation, laughing at those jokes, having kind of being the leader by example. And this is something that we see great employees do, and it's a form of, responsibility without authority or leadership without authority, where they're leading by their own example. The flip side of that coin is that the system is now asking more of its best team players. So that's, one of the cycles of burnout then. It's definitely one of the challenges.
So build upon that. I guess I'm trying to follow that sort of train of thought. So it
Yeah.
leads to burnout?
Well, it can, right? So if you have a new team member who enters into a psychologically unsafe work environment,
Gotcha.
and they are leading by their own example by accepting those that do take risks. So, shoot off a new idea, challenge the status quo, express doubt, brainstorm in a sort of uninhibited way. If they're then encouraging it, that's a level of emotional labor. So we're just asking more of those individuals that are trying to lead without authority. So the best case scenario is that the efforts to address a psychologically unsafe environment is coming from those who actually have the authority, like a top-down approach. So a team manager, a director, the C-suite. And, one of the things that in our work we are challenged to wrestle with is that it's effective and doesn't burn out those that are trying to lead without authority if it comes from the top down. That said, it's the individuals that are not a leader shouldn't feel like they need to wait for a top down approach in order to make incremental improvement for themselves and for their teams. So there's a scope of influence that all of us have at work. We can make improvements within that scope of influence without waiting for a top-down approach to improve the workplace.
No, I love that. I guess middle managers have it tough, right? I mean, they're trying to balance, steering the corporation with, the profits and everything else versus, seeing with the day to day on the floor. I guess why do some workplace cultures overlook the importance of, I'll call it small talk, right? Building these relationships, these conversations with people, because they're so fixated on, we need these numbers, right? We need so many widgets out today and we can't have whatever, so many defects. Why do you think we overlook that? And what is the cost of when we do overlook these kind of small conversations to build?
That's a really good point and a really good question. I think because it doesn't interfere with the bottom line until something goes dramatically wrong. So, one of the fields of study that I find really interesting is resiliency within the workplace. One of the best places to study resiliency within the workplace is in post acute care, so nursing homes and long term care, because we see how psychologically safe and socially secure workplaces for the individuals working there, the nursing staff that are working there, can build resiliency after the death of a patient, which is routine in that type of environment. So I think the numbers reflect a lack of, collegiality or a lack of psychologically safe interactions in the workplace when something goes wrong. And then because something has gone wrong, it's easy to attribute the loss you see in the numbers to the thing that went wrong rather than the lack of resiliency that your staff had to navigate hard times together, because even when things are going right, it's not collegial and it's not psychologically safe.
No, I guess it makes me think of so I've been working in manufacturing for over 15 years and make parts that go into airplanes. And, I guess I'm big on language. And so one of the things I always find interesting is that, we're saying, okay, we want 5% scrap for a KPI, key process indicator for a goal. But then I'm thinking in my mind, it's why are we talking negative? Why are we looking at the positive things, the 95% of what you're doing well, right? I guess my question now is, we're afraid of making mistakes. We're afraid of not being perfect. We're afraid of AI. Some work, is being replaced by AI. What are your thoughts on, I guess, that sort of vulnerability and the fact that we're human, we're going to make mistakes? How does that factor into the workplace?
A huge amount, right? So there's a exercise called like a post-mortem or a post-parade where you evaluate how a project went, whether it went well or whether it went poorly. So a post-mortem is it went poorly, a post-parade is it went well. And you learn from your experiences as an organization through that critical appraisal. And one of the questions that, I think is important to ask in those scenarios is, not who made a mistake, but how did we react to the mistake? Because how we react to the mistake has a direct relationship to willingness to take risk and to innovate on the next project. So, if the reaction to the mistake was personal, was assigned unnecessary blame, then that is going to not only limit that individual's willingness to innovate and to take risk and to brainstorm and to present challenges and doubts when it's hard to present challenges and doubts, it will decrease the entire team's willingness to participate in that type of innovative behavior that pushes organizations forward.
Gotcha. So I want to pivot here for a moment here because your phrase science of work really, I like it. I guess. So when I think of science, right, it's that you got a hypothesis, you're testing it through an experiment. I guess walk us through that. Why do you call it the science of work? I love it.
Yeah, well, one is that the strategies for improvement are from research and science, so managerial sciences, organizational psychology, health services research, health economics, so all of the evidence-based strategies that my colleague and I are writing about and synthesizing across these different fields all come from the field of science. The second piece of why I like the phrase science of work is that it's measurable and reproducible. I think we believe wholeheartedly in our own exceptionalism in our workplaces. So this group of people had the exact right recipe to make a giant mess and it will never happen again. Or this group of people had the magic, right, to create a real success. And while that may be true, it may be that this particular workplace is exceptional. Most of us are in an exceptional workplace that would benefit from strategies that benefit most organizations. So a big part of research and science is that results are reproducible. This intervention, this exposure is associated with this outcome. And I think that approach creates agency for individuals and for organizations. We're not the victim or the unwilling participant of a wild workplace that no one can fix because it's so unique. Instead, we are exposed to exposures that we've studied before, aiming toward outcomes that we can actually measure.
All right, I love that. You have got the science of work now. So what are your thoughts, Cynthia, about self-help? Okay, you've read The Atomic Habits, you've read
Yeah.
the highly, effective people books and all these things. Is there science to those? I guess, what are your thoughts with self-help and I guess academic science books?
I love this question so much. Can I start answering it by telling a little story?
Go for it. I love this.
So when I started at my workplace within the university where I was getting my PhD, I worked for this, I think she was by training a medical engineer, but then she was also an MD. She was just brilliant. And it was like every project had leaders and roles and expectations and milestones and a path to success. And I felt that if I put in the effort and asked the right questions and had a curious mind, I had a path to success. It might be hard, but I could get there. She went on to private industry after being in academics for a long time. And when she left the university, I switched departments. This department had been struggling with a toxic workplace environment for a long time. But from my egotistical perspective, I thought that I had landed into this workplace and that I was the problem. And surely my worst fear was coming true and that I was never smart. I was just nice. And so people liked working with me. It was like my biggest fear popped up, right? Not smart. I'm just nice. I couldn't seem to get anything done. Every email exchange with the administrators within this department seemed tense and non-collaborative, and I wasn't fulfilling what my goals were, and my goals seemed to keep moving around. I didn't have a real boss. Everything just seemed a mess. So I started reading, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Hack Your Anxiety, Atomic Habits, like Stolen Focus. I started reading all of these books because surely I was the problem and I just needed to upskill myself enough to somehow rise above a toxic work environment. My boyfriend at the time, who became my husband, told me to quit. My mom told me to quit. She's like, something seems weird. I refused to quit until my hair started falling out. And then because I am vain, I quit. So eventually I quit. And with the perspective of getting out of that work environment where before you're even out of bed in the morning, you're one eye open looking at your email, where walking into a meeting, you're already uncomfortable, you're already fidgeting. You feel the need to protect yourself more than you feel the need to collaborate and innovate. I thought that within that environment, I could change enough to overcome it to get done what I needed to get done. To make things a little bit worse, my dissertation data was contained within that department. So I felt like I couldn't leave because I was working on my PhD at the same time. In hindsight, that was not true, but at the time it felt like I couldn't leave. But once I left, I started to get some perspective on the organizational forces at play that diminished my ability to exercise my own agency within that workplace, and the sort of expectation minus reality equals disappointment. And the reality was so brusque that I was dealing with my own disappointment. And that's part of why I was struggling to get things done. So, a very long walk to answer the question of the self-help books. One, I still use tips and tricks that I learned in those books today. One of my favorites that I don't remember where it came from, but one of my favorites is, if it takes less than 2 minutes, do it now rather than writing it down and doing it later. Do you remember where that came from? I can't
No, I
remember.
don't. Yeah, I'm trying to think too.
I learned so much from Burnout. That was one of the books that I read during that time. I learned a lot from Atomic Habits, Super Communicators. I read a lot of Adam Grant. So I did get a lot out of it. And in the same breath, I do enjoy some citations to go along with my advice. So just the way that I think.
No, I love that. So, Cynthia, I love the fact you're in academia. I guess, what are your thoughts with coaches today? So, I have this sort of like pattern that I've been seeing on the show. And, I've got people, that are academics like yourself, people that are working a 9 to 5 job. And then most of the entrepreneurs, I'm not going to lie, have a book, they're doing a coaching practice. I guess, what are your thoughts from the academic perspective of a coach today? What, like a life coach, like a performance coach? Like, what does that phrase mean to you?
One of the challenges of, I think, coaching as it's currently constructed in some fields, so not wanting to make a blanket statement, but for some fields, coaching is struggling with the same expectations and measures of accountability that other fields struggled with early in their formation. So there needs to be clear standards and measures of success to make sure that any practice isn't exploitative. So there have been fantastic grassroots efforts to build and maintain practice ethics and practice standards for the wellness community as a whole. And I think that a coaching practice, especially specific to career coaching, those individuals want those clear expectations as well, because the best of those coaches will want clear expectations because they know that they can reach them. So I think the creating standards for practice and expectations will help individuals who are great at their job establish their value and their worth, and those that are not in their current scope of practice making improvements for individuals will not be able to establish their worth.
I guess I'm just like confused on why we have coaches. I'm going to be honest with you. I just, and it's not that I'm against the work that they do. And I've fun if you're listening to this episode now, and I'm not trying to insult you if you're on the show talking about your coaching practice, but I just find it sort of alarming in some sense that, people have lost sort of like the belief that they can make change in their life. And now we're willing to spend X amount of money to have someone say, hey, you need to do this or do that. And I don't know. I mean, having played sports my whole life, I'm used to a coach, and I used to play competitive golf. I had a a swing coach to help me to get in shape for tournaments. But I don't know. I guess that's just me just being biased towards my own question.
I struggle with the money component as well, and the wellness industry has the same challenge of how do you hold individuals to promises that were made in exchange for money if you don't have clear standards of practice, the way other individuals that are paid to help others. Like if you hire someone to clean your windows, there's a checklist of things that will get done based on the payment for that skill, for that expertise. So I think that the best coaches will be, very welcoming to empiric evaluations of their own practices and their own outcomes. It also really depends on whether a coach is working for an organization versus working for in which the organization is paying for them versus working for an individual.
Gotcha. I guess what I struggle with at just the basic transactional level, I mean, the cost thing, it's like now we're sort of equating happiness, well being by investing thousands of dollars, say, into a coach. And what I find is that like enjoyment can come from simple things, right? So now we're sort of building this muscle in our brain, if you will, to say, oh, I need to pay thousands of dollars to be happy, where you don't need anything. You could go for a walk and be content, right? You could have, maybe if you did get the job at Chipotle, you could probably be loving the job at Chipotle, right? Like, sucks for them. They hire you. So you're on to other things now. But like, I don't know. I guess those are yeah. So,
Your thoughts? I would make a much better burrito today if I'd been hired at Chipotle in 2009.
fair enough.
But I think it's a good point, and it's something to think critically about. And I think it has a lot to do with what we were talking about earlier in our conversation about like understanding what work means to you and what your goals are. Because if that upstream thinking hasn't occurred, if that upstream decision making hasn't occurred, then it makes every downstream decision feel impossible because you don't know what that upstream goal is. So when you're in the murkiness of the downstream decisions, you're in a vulnerable position in confronting someone who, in exchange for money will answer those questions or help you answer those questions on your behalf. But a great coach could identify that it's an upstream question that needs to be answered.
Yeah, fair enough. No, love that. So, Cynthia, this is the Work Sucks, But I Like It podcast. What is something that sucks about your work, and what are you doing to make it not suck?
Something that sucks about my work is spending hours editing AI slop submitted by students. That is something that
That does
sucks.
sound pretty crappy.
And
Oh,
sitting
man.
with the discomfort that to generate this text took mere minutes and to read and provide feedback on the text takes much more time. Sitting with that discomfort had a transition period. I feel much less emotional about that labor now than I did when I first started seeing AI slop in my classes.
At the college level.
Graduate level.
Man, that's even worse. Wow. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
gonna not gonna lie, I use AI to help me with kind of questions, but I've never used it to write an assignment. Like, I've never done that. I've like, "Hey, what do you think of this thought?" And then it spouts back something, but I can't
It
believe that. Wow.
so that level, that discomfort, one, I had to overcome the personal discomfort, right? And then in working through that personal discomfort, I did a lot of writing of why is this bothering me so much? And it's because AI is separating when you use AI to write an assignment, you're separating the writing from the thinking. To do it manually, you're thinking while you're writing. To enter in a prompt and then copy paste the response over, you're not doing the critical thinking. And so the critical thinking was happening in my office hours. So I'm like, why does your stakeholder engagement plan, not include these important components that you identified in another section of your paper? And the student was like, my what? So unfamiliarity with their own paper. And
Oh,
I love
wow.
my students and we have
Yeah,
strong students. We have
yeah.
very strong students, but this is something that's happening across the board in academics and in education in general.
Well, even I see it in the workplace as well, just kind of, I call it laziness, without that critical thinking. They'd rather be like, oh, let's chat GBT it or what have you. So it's not just academics, it's in the workplace. So, Cynthia, I know you've got a book coming out this year. It is going to be August 2026, I believe,
That's
called
right.
Administrative Intelligence.
Yeah.
If I think this is when the episode will come out, so this will be perfect timing for this book. I'm definitely excited to read it. What is one thing that if someone were to pick it up, they would take away from reading this book?
I think identifying their own scope of influence. So, whether you're a leader at an organization that's struggling, a leader at an organization that's pivoting, or you're an aspiring leader at the beginning of your career looking to establish, good habits, good practices, and a lot of wins, you'll take away an understanding of what your scope of influence is and what practical measures you can improve through simple strategies within that scope of influence. So, the book does not enable someone at the beginning of their leadership career to change an entire, multinational organization. That's not what we're aiming for. But for a team, identifying roles and responsibilities, identifying expectations, having periodic safe points of evaluation where people can ask questions and course correct if needed within a safe environment does improve outcomes, and that is within the scope of the manager and director level. The second thing that I hope people can walk away with is an understanding of organizational forces that change the way people behave. Good people can behave badly with the right organizational force. Bad people can behave perfectly fine with enough good incentive systems and clear expectations. So, a goal of mine and of my co-authors is that more workplace behavior is explained by systems thinking as opposed to individual blame.
Mm, no, I love that. So when it does come out, where's a good place for them to pick it up?
It'll be available through Taylor and Francis Routledge. So it's under their Pracademic offering, which I love. It's like practical academic. They're
I never heard of
Pracademic,
that. That's cool. Yeah.
which is ironic because our first title was Administructure, Administrative
Oh, that's so
Infrastructure. And they're
funny.
like, we don't love the made up name. And we're like, we'll change it to fit within Pracademic. So Administrative Intelligence will be available. It's available for pre-order now through the
Cool.
Taylor and Francis website. It's available as an exam copy. So if individuals that are teaching managerial sciences or project management want to order a copy of the book to take a look at it, to consider it for their classes, they're eligible for a free copy. And it'll be available on Amazon starting in August.
Awesome. Well, Cynthia, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to speak with you.